A little girl vanished from a playground without a trace. 8 years later, a stranger appeared holding her forgotten toy, unlocking a mystery that would shock an entire town and bring a broken family back together. It was a perfect spring afternoon, one of those rare days when the sunlight filtered softly through the newly blossomed leaves, casting dappled patterns on the ground of the neighborhood playground. Children's laughter filled the air, mingling with the occasional chirping of birds. Parents gathered on benches, chatting quietly while keeping a watchful eye on their kids running between swings, slides, and climbing frames. Among them was little Emma, a bright-eyed, freckled 6-year-old with a mop of curly hair, a shy smile, and a boundless curiosity about the world around her. She clutched her favorite stuffed bunny, Mr. Whiskers, a threadbare but beloved companion she never let go of. Emma's mother, Sarah, watched her daughter with a tender smile, feeling a rare sense of peace after a busy week. For a while, the world seemed simple and good. Emma was surrounded by friends, her small hands reaching up to swing higher, squealing with joy. The warm breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers, and the playground felt like a tiny bubble of happiness suspended in time. But as the minutes slipped by, that bubble shattered. No one noticed when Emma slipped away from the cluster of children near the swings. Perhaps it was the allure of the nearby bushes or a sudden distraction that pulled her attention. What seemed like an ordinary moment quickly spiraled into a nightmare no parent wants to imagine. When Sarah finally looked up from her phone to call Emma's name, panic surged through her veins. The swings rocked gently in the breeze, but Emma was gone. A frantic search erupted instantly. Sarah's heart pounded as she called Emma's name again and again, her voice cracking with desperation. Other parents joined in, combing through the playground and its edges, eyes scanning for any sign of the small girl. The bright afternoon sun suddenly felt harsh and unforgiving. Hours passed like minutes, and the playground that had once echoed with laughter was now filled with shouts and cries. Emergency services arrived, sirens piercing the quiet neighborhood as search parties fanned out. Police questioned every parent, every child, every passerby, hoping for a clue, a sighting, a sound, anything. But the day grew long, and the sun began to dip low behind the trees, painting the sky in bruised shades of orange and purple. Still, there was no sign of Emma. Sarah refused to leave. She clung to the hope that her daughter would return, that this was just a terrible misunderstanding. But as the evening stretched into night, that hope dimmed. Lights from the search crews flickered across the grass, reflecting the agony in her eyes. The playground, once a place of innocence and joy, became a place of silence and dread. Neighbors brought blankets and food to comfort the family, but nothing could soothe the ache of uncertainty. Days turned into weeks, and the media descended, turning the small town upside down with stories of the missing girl. "Where is Emma?" the headlines cried. The community, once vibrant and carefree, was now shadowed by fear and sorrow. Parents hesitated to let their own children out to play, haunted by the thought that what happened to Emma could happen to anyone. The playground was cordoned off and eventually closed indefinitely. The swings and slides stood empty and still, a ghostly reminder of the day a child vanished. Sarah's world had contracted into an endless search. Calls to police, flyers pinned on every telephone pole, sleepless nights filled with prayers and tears. Her husband, Mark, tried to hold the family together, but the strain was immense. The house was filled with silence where Emma's laughter used to ring. Despite the relentless efforts of the police and volunteers, no solid leads ever surfaced. It was as if Emma had vanished into thin air. The mystery of the missing child clung to the town like a heavy fog, refusing to lift. And yet, somewhere deep inside, Sarah held onto a fragile thread of hope that her little girl was out there, somewhere, waiting to be found. The days after Emma's disappearance blurred into one another, each indistinguishable from the last in their crushing weight. Sarah's world had collapsed into an endless cycle of worry and despair, a relentless torment that gnawed at every part of her being. The house once filled with warmth and laughter had grown cold and silent, the walls echoing the emptiness left by Emma's absence. Every corner held a memory, a tiny shoe abandoned in the hallway, a half-finished drawing on the fridge, the faded pink blanket she used to clutch as she drifted asleep. These relics of a life interrupted became painful reminders of all they had lost. Sarah found herself unable to eat, unable to sleep. Her nights were haunted by dreams of Emma. Sometimes she saw her smiling and safe. Other times she found her lost in a dark forest, calling out without answer. The days were no easier. She haunted every phone call, every police briefing, hoping for news that never came. Her mind replayed every moment of that fateful afternoon over and over, searching for clues or signs she might have missed. Could she have done something differently? Could she have stopped this? The guilt was a relentless companion, whispering cruel accusations when she least expected it. Mark, her husband, struggled to maintain a steady front. He worked longer hours, trying to distract himself with busyness, but his eyes betrayed his exhaustion. The strain on their marriage was palpable. Sarah's grief isolated her. She pushed him away, even as she needed him more than ever. Arguments flared over the smallest things, frustration and heartbreak weaving through their words. They both loved Emma fiercely, but found themselves sinking deeper into a loneliness only the missing can understand. The police investigation, once full of urgency and hope, had slowed. Leads dried up, witnesses' memories faded, and resources were diverted to other cases. Detectives kept a careful, polite distance, while Sarah watched their dwindling interest with growing despair. She feared the world was forgetting Emma, that her daughter was becoming just another lost case file in a stack of cold ones. But Sarah refused to give up. She became her own relentless investigator, posting flyers, speaking at community meetings, even hiring a private detective with whatever money she could scrape together. Friends and family offered support, but many drifted away as the months stretched on, uncomfortable with the unbearable pain that hung over every conversation. The once vibrant social gatherings became muted, with people unsure what to say to a family living through a nightmare. Sarah and Mark found themselves increasingly isolated. Even Emma's schoolmates, once her companions, moved on, their memories fading into the background. At night, Sarah would sit by the window, watching the empty street outside, clutching Mr. Whiskers, the old stuffed bunny Emma had left behind. The toy had become a sacred talisman, its worn fabric a fragile link to her daughter. Sarah whispered to it, hoping Emma could somehow hear, hoping that if she said her name enough times, it might bring her back. It was the only comfort she could find, a tangible piece of the little girl she loved so deeply and missed with every breath. As time passed, Sarah noticed the toll the search was taking on her mental health. There were moments of panic and despair, when the fear of never seeing Emma again overwhelmed her completely. She sought therapy, clinging to whatever help she could find keep going. Mark joined her sometimes, both of them learning to navigate grief together, slowly rebuilding the fragile bridges between them. The community, too, felt the scars left by Emma's disappearance. The playground where she vanished remained closed, a physical barrier to healing. Parents whispered warnings to each other, their children no longer running freely through the familiar spaces. The town was no longer a place of safety, but of caution and sorrow. Yet, beneath the despair, there was a simmering determination, not to forget Emma, not to let her story fade into silence. Sarah held onto this hope fiercely, even when the world seemed against her. Every night, she prayed that somehow, against all odds, her daughter would come back, that the nightmare would end, that their family, shattered and broken, might one day be whole again. The disappearance of Emma was more than a family tragedy. It rippled through the entire community like a stone thrown into a still pond, shattering the sense of safety and trust that had once been taken for granted. In the weeks and months following that fateful day, the neighborhood transformed. Streets that had buzzed with the carefree sounds of children playing became quiet and subdued. Playdates were canceled, and parks emptied. Parents exchanged worried glances and hushed conversations about the dangers lurking just out of sight. The local playground, the place where Emma was last seen, stood silent, fenced off with yellow police tape and warning signs. Its colorful swings and slides, once symbols of childhood joy, now appeared eerie and desolate under the gray sky. The familiar laughter and screams of delight were replaced by a hollow quiet that weighed heavily on everyone's hearts. For many families, the playground was a cornerstone of daily life, a gathering place for neighbors, a safe space for children. Now, it was a painful reminder of a lost innocence. Schools held assemblies to address the growing fear among students and parents alike. Teachers tried to provide reassurance, but the worry was palpable. Children asked difficult questions that adults struggled to answer. Why did Emma disappear? Will she ever come back? The teachers' voices were gentle, but the uncertainty in their eyes betrayed their own helplessness. Parents walked their kids to and from school, clutching hands tightly, their vigilance doubling. Sleepovers and weekend trips were put on hold as families kept their children close. Local media coverage intensified. Newspapers printed headline after headline about the missing girl, keeping Emma's face in the public eye. Television reports featured tearful interviews with Sarah and Mark, their pain broadcast for the world to see. While the coverage helped maintain awareness, it also heightened the community's anxiety. Rumors swirled, some baseless, others terrifying, feeding into a collective unease. Everyone wondered if the person responsible was still out there, somewhere close. Neighborhood watch groups formed almost overnight, with volunteers patrolling streets in shifts. Community meetings discussed ways to improve safety and prevent similar tragedies. Signs appeared on lampposts with emergency numbers and tips for child safety. There was a collective determination not to let fear paralyze the town, but beneath the surface, anxiety simmered. The question on everyone's mind was the same. Could this happen again? For Sarah and Mark, the community's response was a bittersweet mixture of support and heartbreak. They were grateful for the kindness and solidarity, but overwhelmed by the constant reminder of their loss. Every time someone mentioned Emma's name, it was a fresh wound. Yet, knowing the town had not forgotten their daughter gave them a fragile thread of comfort. The local council decided to keep the playground closed indefinitely, citing safety concerns and the emotional impact on families. Some parents pushed back, arguing for reopening with new security measures, but others believed the closure was necessary until the mystery was solved. The decision sparked debates and divided opinions, but ultimately, the playground remained empty, a quiet monument to Emma's disappearance. Amidst this fear, stories of kindness also emerged. Strangers donated time and resources to support the search. Local businesses printed missing posters and offered rewards. Volunteers organized candlelight vigils, lighting the night with hope and solidarity. These acts of compassion forged bonds between neighbors, reminding everyone that in the face of tragedy, community could also be a source of strength. But for many, the loss was deeply personal. Parents found themselves questioning every decision. Had they been too careless? Was there something they could have done differently? Mothers and fathers watched their children with new eyes, protective, wary, sometimes even fearful. Childhood itself seemed to have shifted, the carefree days replaced by a cautious vigilance that no one wanted but no one could shake. As the weeks stretched into months, the playground stood as a silent witness to a community forever changed. Its empty swings moved slightly in the breeze, echoing the absence of a little girl who had vanished into the unknown. And yet, beneath the sorrow and fear, a quiet hope lingered. A hope that Emma would be found, that the playground would one day ring with laughter again, and that the town could heal. Nearly 8 years had passed since that devastating day when Emma vanished without a trace from the playground. The town had changed, but the wound left by her disappearance remained raw and unhealed. The playground was still closed, and Emma's story had become a somber legend whispered among the residents. Many had moved on, though the family's pain lingered like a shadow in every corner of the house they once shared. One chilly autumn afternoon, when the leaves had turned gold and rust and the air held a faint bite of winter, a stranger arrived in the small town. No one knew who he was or where he had come from. He appeared suddenly, like a character stepped out of nowhere. Dressed in a weathered jacket and carrying a worn backpack, he walked with a quiet purpose that set him apart from the curious onlookers who spotted him in the town square. The stranger's arrival sparked immediate speculation. Some thought he might be a traveler passing through. Others whispered he could be connected to Emma's case in some way. He didn't speak much, but when he did, his voice was calm and deliberate. He made his way toward the neighborhood where Emma had disappeared, pausing in front of the closed playground, his gaze lingering on the rusted swings swaying gently in the wind. Sarah heard about the stranger quickly. News traveled fast in a town still tightly knit by shared grief. At first, she was cautious, unsure if this was another cruel trick of fate or something more hopeful. But there was something in the stranger's demeanor, a quiet kindness mixed with determination, that caught her attention. Against her better judgment, she found herself wanting to know more. One afternoon, the stranger showed up at Sarah's doorstep. He introduced himself simply as Daniel, a man with no family in town, but with a deep interest in missing persons cases. His eyes held a spark of empathy, and he spoke softly about how he had come across Emma's story while researching unsolved disappearances. He admitted he was drawn here by a sense of unfinished business and a hope to help find answers that others could not. Sarah was wary but desperate for any hope, so she invited Daniel inside. Over the next few hours, he listened carefully as she recounted every detail of that day, every lead they had followed, every dead end. Daniel's presence was steady, his interest genuine but unobtrusive. He didn't make promises, but his quiet confidence suggested he believed there was more to discover. Unlike others who had come and gone over the years, Daniel wasn't just a curious outsider. He carried with him a collection of old notebooks and maps, his backpack filled with tools that hinted at a methodical approach. He spoke of modern investigative techniques, of re-examining evidence through fresh eyes, and the possibility that new clues might still be uncovered. For the first time in years, Sarah felt a flicker of cautious optimism. Word of Daniel's arrival spread through the town, sparking a mixture of skepticism and hope. Some residents greeted him warmly, eager for any sign that Emma's disappearance might finally be solved. Others remained guarded, unwilling to reopen old wounds or believe in another long shot. But Daniel kept a low profile, focused solely on his purpose. He began his own discreet inquiries, speaking to locals who had never been fully interviewed, revisiting places tied to Emma's last known movements. He examined police reports with a critical eye and cross-referenced timelines, piecing together a picture that had grown murky over time. Slowly, his work stirred new questions and, more importantly, new possibilities. For Sarah, Daniel's presence was a lifeline. After so many years of silence and despair, here was someone who refused to give up. Someone who treated Emma's story not as a closed chapter, but as an open case worthy of attention and care. His quiet determination rekindled the hope she had struggled to hold onto through the darkest nights. As autumn deepened and the days grew shorter, Daniel's work intensified. He didn't shy away from the painful memories or the emotional toll of reopening the investigation. Instead, he embraced it with a solemn respect that reassured Sarah he was different. For the first time in nearly a decade, the possibility of answers, and of Emma, felt real again. As Daniel immersed himself in the search for answers, the days grew shorter and the chill of winter crept over the town. Every morning, Sarah clung to a fragile hope, her heart aching with a mixture of anticipation and fear. She had learned over the years that hope could be a double-edged sword, powerful enough to keep her going, but fragile enough to shatter at the slightest disappointment. Yet, Daniel's arrival had reignited something deep inside her, the belief that Emma's story was not over. Then, one crisp morning, the unexpected happened. Sarah received a phone call that would change everything. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but urgent. A stranger had come to town, someone claiming to have something that belonged to Emma, a toy she had once cherished and long thought lost forever. The caller refused to reveal too many details over the phone, only promising to meet Sarah in person that very afternoon. Sarah's heart pounded as she waited. The hours dragged on, every minute heavy with nervous excitement. When a stranger finally appeared at her doorstep, Sarah was struck by the man's humble appearance, a traveler with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. In his hands, he held a small, worn stuffed bunny, Mr. Whiskers, the very same toy Emma had taken everywhere with her. The sight of the familiar ragged ears and threadbare fabric brought tears to Sarah's eyes. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice trembling. The stranger hesitated, then explained he had been passing through the area when he stumbled upon the toy near an abandoned trail at the edge of the woods. He had recognized it from the missing posters and felt compelled to return it. The details he shared were sparse, but precise enough to intrigue Daniel and Sarah both. The toy's unexpected reappearance hinted that Emma might have been closer to home than anyone had imagined. For Sarah, holding Mr. Whiskers again was both a comfort and a torment. It was a tangible piece of Emma's childhood, a link to the days before everything changed. But it was also a reminder of the years lost, of the countless nights spent wondering if her daughter was safe or in danger. The bunny's soft fur was worn thin from years of love, and Sarah's fingers traced the faded stitches as if trying to connect with Emma's presence. Daniel was equally intrigued. He carefully examined the toy, noting its condition and any clues that might shed light on its journey. The fact that it had been found so far from the playground, near a rarely traveled path, suggested new directions for their search. He proposed organizing a small search party to investigate the area thoroughly, hoping to uncover something that had been overlooked. The community rallied once more, volunteers eager to help and share the burden of hope. The discovery of Mr. Whiskers reignited the collective determination to find Emma, fueling a renewed sense of purpose. For the first time in years, the town came together with a unified goal: to bring closure to a painful mystery. As the search expanded, Daniel delved deeper into the history of the surrounding woods and trails. He uncovered old maps and talked to longtime residents who recalled strange happenings years before Emma's disappearance. Some stories were dismissed as local legends or rumors, but Daniel's open mind considered every possibility. The toy's appearance had cracked open a door to the past, and he was determined to walk through it. Sarah and Mark found themselves drawn back into the search with cautious optimism. The return of Mr. Whiskers was a beacon in the darkness, a sign that Emma's story was not forgotten and that answers might still be within reach. It was a bittersweet moment, filled with hope, but also a reminder of the years that had passed without their daughter's presence. That night, Sarah placed the toy on Emma's old bed, a silent promise to keep searching, to never give up. The room felt alive again, touched by the faintest glimmer of possibility. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the echoes of a long-lost childhood and the hope that someday, somehow, Emma would return. The return of Emma's beloved toy, Mr. Whiskers, sparked a surge of renewed energy throughout the town. What had once seemed like a cold, unsolvable case now flickered with a faint but unmistakable light of hope. For Sarah and Mark, the reappearance of the toy was both a sign and a catalyst, a tangible piece of Emma's presence that made the impossible feel suddenly plausible. Daniel's calm determination fueled their courage, and together they began to organize a more focused search effort, determined to follow every lead, no matter how small. Daniel took the lead, his methodical approach breathing new life into the investigation. He mapped out the area surrounding the playground and the nearby woods where the toy had been found, marking potential places where Emma could have wandered or been taken. His research extended beyond the obvious. He sought out local histories, spoke with longtime residents, and scrutinized police records for any overlooked details. Every scrap of information was carefully considered. The community rallied behind them. Volunteers came forward, ready to comb through the woods, scan abandoned buildings, and cover every inch of the terrain. Flyers with Emma's picture were redistributed, and social media posts reached far beyond the small town's borders. Fundraisers were held to support the growing search effort, and the local news media provided ongoing coverage, keeping Emma's name alive in the public consciousness. Sarah and Mark became more involved than ever. The couple spent countless hours organizing search parties, meeting with volunteers, and sharing Emma's story with anyone who would listen. Their grief was raw, but beneath it was a fierce determination not to let their daughter be forgotten. Each search felt like a step toward hope, even when the days ended with no new answers. Daniel introduced advanced search techniques, using drones to survey dense forest areas, employing forensic experts to analyze the soil and vegetation near potential sites, and even consulting with specialists in missing persons cases from outside the region. His knowledge and connections brought new resources to the effort, transforming it from a grassroots search into a more sophisticated investigation. The search teams encountered challenges. Dense underbrush, rugged terrain, and unpredictable weather slowed progress. Some areas once considered safe were now recognized as dangerous or difficult to access. Yet the volunteers pressed on, motivated by the possibility of finding Emma or uncovering clues that might explain her disappearance. As the search intensified, Sarah often found herself overwhelmed by a mixture of hope and fear. Every rustle in the trees, every unexplained noise sent her heart racing. Memories flooded back. Emma's laughter, the way she clung to Mr. Whiskers, the bright sparkle in her eyes. These memories were both a balm and a burden, reminding Sarah of what was lost and what might still be found. The town's mood slowly shifted. Where once there was resignation, now there was renewed determination. Community meetings became more frequent and optimistic, with residents sharing tips, planning coordinated search routes, and supporting the family. Local law enforcement renewed their efforts too, reopening the case with fresh eyes and collaborating closely with Daniel and the volunteers. One evening, after a long day of searching, Daniel gathered Sarah and Mark to discuss a new lead. A nearby cabin, long abandoned and hidden deep in the woods, had come up in conversation with an elderly neighbor. The cabin had never been thoroughly investigated and was rumored to have been used by hunters or travelers passing through. It was a place that no one thought much about, but Daniel's intuition told him it deserved a closer look. Excitement mixed with apprehension as they planned a small team to visit the cabin the next day. The possibility of discovering something new, something that could finally explain Emma's disappearance, hung in the air like a fragile promise. For Sarah and Mark, it was a moment charged with emotion, hope tempered by the knowledge that the truth, whatever it was, could still bring heartbreak. As night fell, Sarah sat beside Emma's empty bed, Mr. Whiskers resting in her hands. She whispered a prayer for her daughter's safety and for the strength to face whatever tomorrow might bring. The search was far from over, but for the first time in years, the light of hope burned brighter than the shadows of despair. The morning air was crisp and still as Daniel, Sarah, Mark, and a small group of volunteers made their way toward the cabin hidden deep within the forest. The trees towered overhead, their bare branches creaking softly in the light breeze, casting long shadows on the forest floor. The path was narrow and overgrown, rarely traveled, and every step forward felt like peeling back the layers of a secret long kept by the woods. The group moved quietly, their footsteps muffled by fallen leaves, nerves taut with anticipation. The cabin came into view gradually, a small, weathered structure, its wooden walls faded and cracked from years of exposure. The roof sagged in places, and the windows were dirty and partially boarded up. It was the kind of place children might fear, but adults had forgotten. Yet to Daniel, Sarah, and Mark, it represented a tangible link to the past, a new thread in the tangled web of Emma's disappearance. Daniel led the group cautiously, examining the exterior for signs of recent activity or anything that might have been missed during earlier searches. Near the entrance, they found footprints partially obscured by dirt and fallen leaves, too faint to identify clearly, but enough to suggest someone had been there recently. It was a clue that sent a ripple of hope through the team. Inside, the cabin was cold and musty, filled with the scent of damp wood and old earth. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light, piercing through cracks in the walls. The floorboards creaked underfoot as they stepped carefully, scanning every corner for evidence. It was clear the cabin hadn't been used as a permanent home, but rather as a temporary shelter, perhaps by hunters or travelers, as the neighbor had said. As Daniel sifted through the debris, Sarah noticed something on a worn wooden table, a small, folded piece of paper yellowed with age. Her heart leapt as she picked it up, unfolding it carefully. The paper bore faint handwriting, barely legible but unmistakably a note. It read, "Look where the shadows fall." The words were cryptic, mysterious, but to Sarah, they were a sign, a puzzle piece in a game they had only just begun to understand. Encouraged by this discovery, Daniel directed the team to search for places where shadows from the cabin or surrounding trees might fall in a meaningful pattern, underneath floorboards, behind loose panels, or hidden in nearby vegetation. Hours passed as they combed the area methodically, their eyes sharp for anything out of place. Then, Mark's voice broke the silence. "Over here," he called, kneeling beside a loose stone near the cabin's foundation. The stone shifted under his hands, revealing a shallow hollow beneath. Inside, wrapped in a faded cloth, was a small box, its latch rusted but still intact. With trembling hands, Daniel opened the box to reveal a collection of objects: a broken compass, a faded photograph of a young girl who bore striking resemblance to Emma, and a small, worn notebook. The notebook's pages were filled with cryptic notes, sketches of the surrounding woods, and a series of dates that coincided with Emma's disappearance. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The photograph was the most powerful piece of evidence yet, the clearest link to her daughter's presence near the cabin. The notebook hinted at someone who had been watching, waiting, or trying to communicate, someone who knew more than they had shared. As they packed the items carefully for further examination, Daniel's mind raced with possibilities. The cabin was more than just an abandoned shelter. It was a clue, a silent witness to secrets long buried. But who had left the note? Who had hidden these items? And most importantly, what had happened to Emma during those final hours? The group left the cabin with a mixture of hope and unease. The discovery raised as many questions as it answered, opening a door to a deeper mystery that now demanded to be solved. For Sarah and Mark, it was a painful but necessary step, one that brought them closer to the truth, even as it revealed how much remained hidden. That night, back at the house, Sarah held the faded photograph tightly, tracing the outline of the girl's face with her finger. "We're getting closer, Emma," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I promise we won't stop until we find you." The days following the discovery of the cabin's hidden box were filled with a flurry of activity. Daniel carefully examined the notebook, poring over each cryptic entry and sketch with the meticulous attention of a seasoned investigator. The faded photographs and notes suggested that Emma's disappearance was entwined with something far more complex than a simple lost child's case. There were references to secret meetings, shadowy figures, and locations deep within the forest that none of them had considered before. Sarah and Mark spent countless hours discussing the implications, their conversations often trailing into the early hours of the morning. The notebook was a puzzle piece, a whisper from the past, but it also brought a chilling realization. Emma might have been aware of something dangerous, something that put her at risk long before she vanished. The thought was unbearable, but gave new urgency to their search. Meanwhile, Daniel contacted forensic experts and historians to analyze the materials. The compass, broken but still recognizable, was an old military model, an odd choice for a child's possession, hinting at a connection to someone with a secretive past. The photograph's origins were traced back to a nearby town, where a family had reported a missing girl matching Emma's description years ago. It was a lead that broadened the scope of the investigation. Sarah's heart ached as she read the notebook's entries, trying to decode the cryptic language. Some passages mentioned a safe place, while others warned of watchers in the shadows. It seemed Emma had encountered people who both protected and threatened her, a dynamic that added layers of complexity to the mystery. The thought that Emma had lived with such fear was unbearable, but it also explained why she might have left clues for someone to find. The community, too, was stirred by the revelations. News of the cabin's secrets and the new leads spread quickly, reigniting hope among those who had feared the case was cold forever. Volunteers stepped up with renewed determination, eager to explore the forest in search of the safe place mentioned in the notebook. Sarah found herself drawn to one passage in particular, a sketch of a tree with a peculiar marking on its bark. The accompanying note read, "Beneath the guardian's watchful eye, the lost shall be found." It was vague, but it pointed to a location, somewhere the trees themselves might be guarding a secret. Daniel and the search team planned a targeted expedition to find the marked tree, hoping it would lead them to more answers. Equipped with a notebook, GPS devices, and a fresh sense of purpose, they ventured into the woods once again. The forest seemed different now, alive with secrets waiting to be uncovered. As they moved deeper into the trees, the tension was palpable. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves made their hearts race. They searched carefully for the marking described in the notebook, a symbol etched into the bark that could guide them to Emma or reveal the truth behind her disappearance. Hours passed with no sign, but just as the sun began to dip below the horizon, Daniel spotted it, a carved symbol on the trunk of an ancient oak tree. It was a faint but deliberate marking, worn by time but unmistakable. The group gathered around, their excitement mingled with a cautious sense of hope. Beneath the tree, hidden among the roots and earth, they discovered a shallow cavity, just large enough to hold a small box or container. Carefully, Daniel reached inside and pulled out a weathered tin box. Inside were letters, handwritten notes from Emma, and scraps of a diary revealing fragments of her story. The writing spoke of fear, courage, and a desperate hope to be found. Sarah's hands trembled as she read Emma's words. Her daughter had endured so much, yet she had never stopped fighting, never stopped believing someone would come for her. The diary was a testament to Emma's resilience, a beacon shining through the darkness of the years. That night, as Sarah sat with the diary open on her lap, she felt a connection that transcended time and distance. Emma was speaking to her through the pages, sharing her truth and her strength. It was a moment of profound love and heartbreak, but also of hope, a promise that no matter how long it took, Emma's story was still unfolding. The discovery of Emma's diary beneath the ancient oak tree was nothing short of a breakthrough. As Sarah carefully turned each fragile page, the words came alive, raw, heartfelt, and hauntingly vivid. Emma's voice echoed through the years, sharing moments of fear, hope, and resilience that Sarah had longed to hear. It was as if her daughter was reaching out through the pages, trying to bridge the gap between the past and present. The diary revealed Emma's experiences during those dark days after she vanished from the playground. She wrote about hiding in the woods, finding shelter where she could, and avoiding the mysterious figures she referred to as the Watchers. Her entries detailed moments of loneliness, but also glimpses of kindness from strangers who had helped her, brief flickers of humanity in an otherwise grim existence. One passage spoke of a small clearing near the cabin where Emma had felt safe for a time, a place she called the sanctuary. She described the gentle rustling of leaves, the warmth of sunlight filtering through the branches, and the comforting presence of her stuffed toy, Mr. Whiskers. This sanctuary was the one place she dared to hope someone would find her. The diary also contained coded messages, cryptic notes that seemed to be clues left intentionally, a trail for anyone who might come searching. Emma's intelligence and bravery shone through every line, revealing a child who had refused to be broken by her circumstances. Her writing hinted at an unspoken understanding that someone was watching out for her, a guardian in the shadows. Sarah clung to the diary like a lifeline. Each word renewed her determination to uncover the truth and bring Emma home. Mark, too, was deeply moved by the diary's contents, his grief mingling with newfound hope. They shared the diary with Daniel, who immediately recognized its importance as evidence and a guide for the ongoing search. Inspired by the diary, the search efforts intensified. The coded messages and descriptions of the sanctuary led the team to explore new areas around the cabin and deeper into the forest. Volunteers became adept at interpreting Emma's clues, piecing together the path she had taken. The diary was more than a record. It was a map, emotional, cryptic, and vital. Meanwhile, Sarah found herself haunted by questions. Who were the Watchers? Why had Emma been left to survive on her own? Had she been taken, or had she run from something? The diary provided hints, but no clear answers, fueling a mix of hope and frustration. Still, every entry was a step closer to understanding. As days turned to weeks, the community's support remained steadfast. The story of Emma's diary spread beyond the town, attracting the attention of media and experts. Specialists in cryptography and missing persons offered assistance, eager to help decode the diary's more perplexing passages. One night, as Sarah sat by the fireplace with the diary open before her, she felt a profound sense of connection. Emma's words were a gift, painful but precious, revealing a strength that Sarah had never fully imagined. She vowed to honor that strength by continuing the search, never giving up, no matter what obstacles lay ahead. The diary had opened a door to Emma's world, a world of fear, hope, and survival. And through it, Sarah and Mark found a renewed sense of purpose, to uncover the truth, to heal the wounds of the past, and ultimately, to bring their daughter home. The rediscovery of Emma's diary ignited something profound, not only in Sarah and Mark, but in the heart of the entire town. What had once been a quiet, grieving community resigned to unanswered questions suddenly felt alive again, energized by the hope that Emma might still be out there. Her words had traveled far beyond the fragile pages of her diary. They had touched the soul of everyone who read them. Local media picked up the story first. A journalist from the town's small paper published an article titled "Emma's Voice Found in the Woods," which soon went viral. Before long, regional news stations and national networks descended on the town. Cameras lined the forest's edge. Reporters walked the same trails where Sarah and Daniel had once searched in silence. And Emma's photo, once a fading memory on missing posters, was now everywhere again, shining with renewed clarity. Volunteers poured in from nearby cities and even neighboring states. Experienced hikers, search and rescue teams, and wilderness survival experts offered their help. Some brought drones to scan the forest canopy from above. Others combed through old property records, seeking abandoned cabins or old footpaths not shown on modern maps. The town that had once grieved in quiet solitude was now a hive of coordinated determination. Sarah and Mark found themselves at the center of it all. They attended town meetings packed to the brim with people eager to help. Maps were pinned to walls, red markers indicating places mentioned in Emma's diary. Teams were dispatched to explore areas surrounding the cabin, including deep ravines, dried creek beds, and forgotten logging roads. And yet, despite the swelling support, not everyone welcomed the spotlight. Some longtime residents whispered in hushed tones, uncomfortable with the attention. A few older members of the community seemed uneasy whenever Emma's mention of the Watchers was brought up. One woman, a reclusive widow named Marlene, had a particularly strange reaction when shown a photograph of the compass found in the hidden box. Her face paled, and she muttered something about them always watching, even back then, before abruptly leaving the room. Daniel made a note to speak with her again in private. Back at home, Sarah found herself answering phone calls day and night, from journalists, relatives of other missing persons, and strangers who claimed to know something. Among them was a man named Elliot, a retired forest ranger who had worked in the area during the time Emma disappeared. His voice trembled over the phone as he described seeing a child's footprints years ago near a secluded trail, a path that had since been overgrown. At the time, he had dismissed it, assuming a family had simply gone off trail, but now he feared he'd overlooked something vital. Daniel organized a team to explore that forgotten trail. Sarah and Mark joined, hearts pounding with the hope that Emma had once walked there. The group hiked in silence, each footstep pressing deeper into memories and possibilities. They found remnants of a small fire pit and a makeshift structure covered in vines. Inside was a tattered piece of fabric that looked eerily familiar to Sarah, blue with faded cartoon prints, the same pajamas Emma had worn the day she disappeared. Sarah's knees gave out when she saw it, and Mark caught her just before she collapsed. The realization hit her like a tidal wave. Emma had been here. She had lived here, if only briefly. Every motherly instinct screamed inside her that they were closer than ever. The townspeople continued their efforts with newfound energy. Search parties expanded, investigations intensified, and suspicion began to grow around certain individuals who had remained quiet all these years. People started asking hard questions, not just about where Emma might be, but why she had never been found. What secrets had this town been hiding all along? The town was no longer just searching for a missing girl. They were peeling back the layers of their own past. And deep beneath those layers, something was waiting to be uncovered. Just as the search efforts reached a fever pitch, with volunteers scouring the woods and detectives reopening old case files, something unexpected happened. Something so surreal that it froze Sarah in her tracks. One rainy morning, as she and Mark returned from another search near the old trail Elliot had mentioned, they found a package waiting on their porch. It was small, wrapped in plain brown paper, with no return address. Only their names were scribbled on the front in careful, shaky handwriting. Mark picked it up cautiously, and Sarah instinctively stepped back, her heart racing. It had been years since anyone had left anything anonymous at their door, and this one felt different. Mark slowly opened the package while Sarah stood behind him, holding her breath. Inside was a single object, Mr. Whiskers, Emma's favorite stuffed toy. Tears instantly welled up in Sarah's eyes as she recognized the worn-out rabbit with one button eye and frayed ears. She'd sewn that ear back on herself when Emma was 4, and there was a tiny ink stain near the foot from the time Emma had given him a tattoo. This wasn't a replica or a mistake. This was Emma's toy, lost the day she vanished from the playground. How is this possible? Sarah whispered, barely able to speak. There was a note, folded and tucked beneath Mr. Whiskers' soft arm. Mark opened it and read it aloud. I found this in the woods. I think it belongs to someone you love. I'm sorry it took so long. No name, no signature, just those 2 cryptic sentences. Daniel was called immediately. He arrived within the hour, and while he examined the package for fingerprints and DNA, Sarah held Mr. Whiskers to her chest like a lifeline. The toy was more than a memory. It was proof. Proof that Emma had survived. Proof that someone had seen her, maybe even helped her. And someone had brought this back. But who? Security camera footage from nearby homes was checked, but the rain had obscured most of it. One neighbor reported seeing a tall man in a dark hooded jacket walking down the street late the night before, but they hadn't thought anything of it. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He just left the package and disappeared into the night. Daniel expanded his investigation, checking for anyone who had recently returned to town after years away. The name Elliot, the retired ranger who had mentioned footprints, was revisited, but he was quickly ruled out. He had an alibi and no connection to the stuffed toy. Other townsfolk were questioned, especially those who had acted strangely during the diary's discovery. Then a new tip came in from the edge of town. A young woman working the night shift at a 24-hour gas station had seen someone matching the stranger's description. He'd come in around midnight the night before the package appeared, paid in cash, and asked for directions to Maplewood Drive, Sarah and Mark Street. When she offered to look it up, he refused. I know where it is, he'd said. The woman remembered his face vaguely. Early 40s, gaunt, sunburned, eyes too sharp to forget, but she hadn't seen him before or since. Sarah and Mark sat together that night, staring at Mr. Whiskers resting on the coffee table. The toy didn't speak, but it held volumes. It had been with Emma. It had survived. Someone had cared enough to return it. But why now? Why after all these years? Sarah felt it in her bones. This wasn't the end. The stranger hadn't just returned a forgotten toy. He'd sent a message. He knew something, maybe everything. And if he had found Mr. Whiskers, maybe, just maybe, he knew where Emma was. The questions multiplied as hope surged again in their hearts. For the first time in 8 long years, something tangible had come home. It wasn't just a toy. It was a sign, and the stranger wasn't done yet. In the days that followed the return of Mr. Whiskers, Sarah felt like she was living in 2 worlds at once. In one, she was the same mother who had spent years staring out the window, waiting for a daughter who never came home. In the other, she was someone new, someone with reason to hope again, someone daring to believe that Emma might still be out there. But the questions hung heavy. Who was the stranger who had returned the toy? And how had he gotten it? Daniel pushed his team harder than ever, scanning every database, revisiting every lead that had gone cold over the years. But the man remained a mystery, a ghost in a town that no longer wanted to forget. Then, during one quiet afternoon at the local library, Sarah uncovered something entirely by accident. She'd taken to visiting the library regularly, drawn to Emma's favorite childhood books as if they were a thread leading back to her daughter. That day, a woman named Janice, a longtime librarian who remembered Emma fondly, approached Sarah with a gentle smile. "I saw what happened on news," Janice said softly. "I'm so sorry, but I think I might have something strange to show you." Janice led her to the far end of the children's section, where local kids often dropped off books in a donation bin. She explained that a few weeks earlier, someone had left behind a stack of children's books. Nothing unusual, except one of the books had a folded piece of paper inside. "I didn't think much of it until I saw Mr. Whiskers on TV," Janice said, eyes wide with concern. She handed Sarah the note. It was crumpled, yellowed at the edges, as though someone had carried it for a long time before letting it go. Sarah unfolded it carefully. In faint pencil strokes were the words, "I'm not far. The woods listen. She's not alone." Sarah's knees trembled. The handwriting was unfamiliar, neither hers, Mark's, nor Emma's, but there was something about the tone that felt deliberate. She immediately brought the note to Daniel, who cross-checked the library's donation logs and security footage, but again, the trail was cold. Whoever was leaving these messages was careful, never caught on camera, never identified. Still, the pattern was undeniable. Sarah began studying Emma's diary again, this time looking not just for memories, but for clues. It struck her that Emma had written about someone watching, but not unkindly. She described a man with eyes like moonlight who left food near the rocks but never spoke. At the time, the writings had seemed like the imagination of a frightened child, but now Sarah wasn't so sure. Could it have been the same man? A recluse? A hermit? A guardian of some kind? Meanwhile, Daniel's team dug into wilderness permits and survivalist records. After days of combing through forms and ranger reports, they found something. 10 years earlier, a man named Alan Croft had applied for a permit to live off-grid in a forest cabin deep in the national woods just a few miles beyond the known trails. He had no listed relatives, no phone, and hadn't been seen in years. His file had been marked inactive, assumed deceased or relocated. Daniel's heart pounded. The location was remote, but within the same forest where Emma's pajamas had been found. A plan was made. At dawn, he would lead a team to investigate the old cabin site. They wouldn't go in blind. Sarah and Mark were told to stay behind, but they insisted on coming. "She's our daughter," Sarah said firmly. "If there's a chance she's there, I want to be the one to call her name." No one argued. That night, sleep came in restless bursts. Sarah clutched Mr. Whiskers in bed beside her, imagining Emma doing the same somewhere not so far away. The wind outside rustled the trees, and for the first time in 8 years, it didn't sound like mourning. It sounded like whispering, calling, guiding them toward the truth. The morning of the search arrived cloaked in a tense silence. Mist blanketed the forest, curling around the trees like a veil, and the only sounds were the soft crunch of boots against damp earth and the distant caw of a crow echoing overhead. Sarah gripped Mark's hand as they followed Daniel and the search team into the heart of the woods. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself knew how long this journey had taken to begin. The team moved in silence, their path narrowing with every mile. They used outdated maps that marked a crude trail leading toward the coordinates linked to the off-grid permit. The deeper they went, the more the world around them changed. The canopy above thickened, casting shadows that danced across the undergrowth. Sarah remembered Emma's diary entries, the descriptions of whispering trees and the man with quiet eyes. She half expected to hear a voice call out from behind a trunk or see a flash of movement in the distance. After nearly 4 hours of hiking, the lead ranger raised his hand to stop the group. Just ahead, through a curtain of moss-covered branches, stood an old cabin. Tom had nearly swallowed it. The roof sagged under the weight of years, and vines had begun their slow conquest of the wooden walls. A thin trail of smoke rose from the crooked chimney, fresh, unmistakable. Someone was inside. Daniel signaled for silence and approached slowly. He knocked twice on the door, hand resting on the holster at his side. The forest held its breath. Then a soft creak as the door opened. A man stood there, thin, weathered, beard streaked with gray, eyes sunken but alert. He didn't flinch at the sight of the uniform or the strangers behind Daniel. He simply nodded, as though he'd been expecting this for years. "I know why you're here," he said quietly. Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding in her ears. "Do you know Emma?" Her voice cracked on the last word, the weight of hope and fear too much to contain. The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he stepped aside and motioned him in. Inside the cabin was sparse, but lived in, blankets folded neatly, books stacked against the wall, a pot of something warm simmering over a tiny wood stove. And in the corner, resting against a shelf, was something Sarah recognized instantly. The small wooden rocking horse Mark had made for Emma's 4th birthday. Tears filled her eyes. "Where is she?" she asked, barely above a whisper. The man, who introduced himself as Alan Croft, nodded slowly. "She's safe. She's alive. But she's afraid. She doesn't remember much of her old life. Not anymore. I found her the day after the storm. She was crying near the river, soaked, freezing. I thought someone would come looking, but no one did. Days turned into weeks. I didn't know what else to do." He looked at them, guilt washing over his features. "I never meant to keep her from you. But she wouldn't speak, wouldn't tell me her name. She was so small, so broken. I taught her to survive. I taught her to read again. She calls me Papa Owl. I thought maybe she was mine to protect now." Mark stepped forward, his voice trembling. "Can we see her?" Alan hesitated, then nodded. "She's nearby. I built her a little space, a safe place where she wouldn't be frightened. She still doesn't trust strangers. But maybe she'll remember you." The group followed Alan deeper into the woods, past an overgrown trail that twisted through the trees. Every branch they pushed aside, every rustle of leaves brought them closer. Sarah's heart felt like it might shatter from the pressure of anticipation. And then they saw it. A small, hand-built shelter nestled beneath a cluster of fir trees. A simple rope swing hung from one branch. Drawings were pinned to the wooden slats, crayon pictures of animals, stars, and stick figures. And standing there, back turned, a girl no older than 12, humming softly as she braided long strands of wild grass. Sarah stopped, her breath caught in her throat. Emma. The years had changed her, but a mother knows. And in that moment, Sarah understood her daughter wasn't gone. She had been hidden in plain sight, waiting for the world to come calling again. For a long moment, no one moved. The girl with the braided grass sat quietly under the boughs, her face turned slightly away, humming a tune only she seemed to know. Her hair was longer now, falling in uneven waves down her back. Her clothes were mismatched, but clean. Someone had cared for her. There was no question in Sarah's heart. This was Emma. Tears brimmed in her eyes. She stepped forward slowly, her breath catching with each movement, like a dream that might vanish if she reached out too quickly. Mark stayed behind, his hand gripping a nearby tree for support, his legs trembling. Neither wanted to shatter the delicate reality that stood before them. Alan placed a gentle hand on Sarah's arm. "She startles easily," he said softly. "She remembers shadows more than names. Go slow." Sarah nodded. Her voice was barely more than a whisper. "Emma." The girl turned slightly. Her humming stopped, but she didn't speak. Her eyes, a deep and familiar green, locked with Sarah's. There was no fear in them, just a quiet curiosity, like someone standing at the edge of forgotten memory. Sarah took another step forward. "It's me, baby. It's Mom." Emma's brows furrowed. Her lips parted as if she were about to speak, but then she looked toward Alan, silently asking something in that glance. Alan nodded, reassuring. "It's okay," he said. "They're not here to take anything away. They're here to bring something back." Emma rose slowly. Her legs were long and lean now, her stance cautious but not afraid. She tilted her head as she studied Sarah's face. Then, without warning, she stepped forward just a little and reached out her hand. "Sharam et ite hefwe." Their fingers touched, and a quiet gasp escaped Sarah's lips. "You're real," she choked out. "You're really here." Emma's eyes began to shimmer, confusion and recognition warring behind them. "You smell like lavender," she said. "Like the blanket." Sarah began to sob, the sound muffled by the quiet rustling of the trees. "You remember your blanket?" she whispered. "The purple one with the stars? You used to carry it everywhere." Emma nodded slowly. I see it when I dream." Mark stepped forward now, his steps shaky but determined. "Emma," he said, his voice cracking. "It's Daddy." Emma looked at him for a long time. Then she blinked. "You have the same eyes," she said softly. From the picture by the bed, Mark collapsed to his knees, tears streaming freely down his face. "I never stopped looking for you," he whispered. "Not for 1 second." The wind moved through the trees then, carrying with it the scent of pine and something softer, like old memories stirring from sleep. Emma took a step closer to both of them. Sarah opened her arms, not pushing, just offering. Emma hesitated, then stepped into her mother's embrace. It wasn't a dramatic lunge or a sobbing collapse. It was quiet, cautious, like a child testing the warmth of something long forgotten. But it was real. She stood in her mother's arms, her body stiff at first, then slowly softening. Mark wrapped his arms around them both, and for the first time in 8 years, the heart of their family was whole again. Alan stood back, watching with tired eyes and a bittersweet smile. Daniel approached him quietly. "You saved her," he said. Alan shook his head. "I just kept her breathing. She saved herself." Daniel nodded. "You'll need to answer some questions, but thank you." Back at the shelter, Sarah found more drawings, some of Emma with Alan, others with a woman's silhouette and stars in the sky. One drawing stood out. A little girl, holding the hand of a woman in a lavender dress, standing in front of a house with a red door. Their home, Emma had remembered, somewhere deep inside. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows through the trees, they knew it was time to leave. But they didn't want to rush her. They gave her the choice. Emma looked around the shelter, then up at Sarah. "Can I bring my drawings?" Sarah smiled through her tears. "Of course, sweetheart. You can bring anything you want." Emma folded them carefully, holding them like precious treasure. Then, hand in hand with her parents, she took her first steps toward the world she had left behind. Toward home. The ride back to town was quiet but filled with a sense of awe, as if none of them quite believed what was happening. Emma sat in the back seat between her parents, her small hands clinging to a bundle of drawings and the stuffed rabbit, the same one Sarah had seen in the stranger's hands all those weeks ago. She hadn't spoken much since leaving the woods, but she didn't need to. Her presence was enough. The occasional glance, the soft squeeze of her mother's hand, the way she leaned slightly against her father's shoulder, all of it said more than words ever could. Mark drove, one hand on the wheel, the other resting protectively on Emma's backpack in the console. Every few minutes, he checked the mirror, as if to make sure she was still really there. Sarah, sitting beside him, kept stealing glances back, her eyes filled with gratitude, her lips trembling with unspoken prayers. When they reached the station, Daniel and the officers moved gently, guiding the family through the necessary steps. Emma was given a quiet room, a warm meal, and space to rest. A counselor was brought in, someone trained to help children who had lived through prolonged trauma. They spoke softly to Emma, never pushing, just offering calm presence. To everyone's surprise, Emma opened up slowly, like the petals of a flower in hesitant sunlight. She told them what she could remember. The storm had come suddenly, she said. She had been playing under the big slide when the thunder cracked. People were yelling, running. She didn't know where her mother had gone. She had tried to follow another girl, but ended up near the trees. Then she tripped. Everything went dark. The next memory was the sound of water and a strange man with kind eyes kneeling beside her. He had wrapped her in something warm, given her food, told her not to cry. At first, she waited every day for someone to find her. But no one came. The man taught her to read again, to plant vegetables, to recognize birds. He never hurt her. He called her Little Owl. There were gaps in her memory, entire months she couldn't account for. The professionals explained that this was normal, a defense mechanism in young children who experienced overwhelming fear or prolonged disconnection from their past. What mattered most now was that she was safe, surrounded by those who loved her. In the days that followed, the story exploded across the news. Missing girl found alive after 8 years in wilderness became the headline that dominated television, internet feeds, and newspapers. Strangers sent letters of support, toys, and books. Local schools held assemblies in her honor. Candlelight vigils were replaced with celebrations. But for Sarah and Mark, none of the media frenzy mattered. All they cared about was reintroducing their daughter to the life she had lost and doing it on her terms. Emma was brought home quietly, without fanfare. Her old room had been preserved almost like a museum, but now it was gently updated. New bedsheets, a fresh coat of paint, a nightlight in the shape of the moon. Sarah replaced the old calendar with a new one and took down the missing posters that had hung beside her vanity for 8 years. Emma touched everything with quiet wonder. She didn't remember all of it, but she said the smells helped: lavender, cinnamon, the faint scent of laundry soap. She found an old photograph of herself in a ballerina costume, holding hands with Sarah in the background. She stared at it for a long time. "That's me," she whispered. "I think I danced like that in my dreams." Sarah knelt beside her, holding her close. "You're home now. You can dance whenever you want." At night, Mark tucked her in. Emma clutched her rabbit to her chest, and just as he turned off the light, she spoke again. "Will man be okay? The one who helped me." Mark paused. "He's being taken care of. People know now that he didn't mean harm. He might not have done everything the right way, but he kept you safe. And that means something." Emma nodded and yawned. "Tell him, thank you." "I will," Mark whispered, brushing her hair back. "Sleep well, sweetheart." As the door closed and silence settled over the house, there was peace, not because everything had gone back to normal, but because their daughter was finally home. And healing had begun. Weeks passed, then months, and the town that had once been shrouded in grief slowly transformed into a place of healing. For the Whitman family, each day was a gentle rediscovery of routines, of laughter, of trust. Emma adjusted with remarkable resilience, though there were moments when the past crept back in shadows. A sudden storm would make her flinch. A darkened hallway might give her pause. But each time, Sarah or Mark would be there, holding her hand, reminding her she was safe. She started school again, though at first only part-time. Her teachers were patient, her classmates respectful. Some remembered her. Others had only heard her name whispered in stories and news clips. But Emma brought her quiet light with her wherever she went. She carried her sketchbook to class, often drawing trees, birds, stars, and sometimes a cabin with smoke rising from its chimney. One page always remained folded in half. When asked about it, she would simply smile and say, "That one's just for me." Therapy became part of the new routine, not just for Emma, but for her parents too. They were learning how to be a family again, how to balance memories with the present, how to let go of guilt, how to rebuild the fragile, beautiful thing they had once feared lost forever. One afternoon, Daniel arrived at their door. He wasn't in uniform, just jeans and a sweater. He carried a box in his hands and wore an expression that blended reverence with quiet anticipation. "This came through evidence release," he said softly. "Figured you'd want it." Mark took the box and opened it slowly. Inside was the same stuffed rabbit that had once been dropped at the station by a stranger. Emma, who had been painting at the dining table, looked up the moment she saw it. Her eyes widened with recognition, not of the toy, but of something deeper. "He brought it back," she said. He remembered. Sarah knelt beside her. "You mean the man from the woods?" Emma nodded slowly. "He said one day someone would come for me, that I had to be brave until then, that the rabbit would lead them." The weight of that moment fell over them like snowfall, quiet, soft, and undeniable. That old toy, faded and frayed, had carried the thread of hope between two worlds. It had spoken when Emma couldn't. It had never been just a toy. It had been a message in plain sight. A few days later, they received a letter in the mail. It had no return address, only a small press leaf inside the envelope and a short note. "I watched the stars with her every night. She reminded me why the world was worth protecting. Thank you for finding her. Thank you for giving her back her name." There was no need for further explanation. Alan had disappeared from the town, likely to avoid legal scrutiny or media attention. But he had left behind something more valuable than a name or a story. He had left behind a child still full of wonder, still capable of love. As spring settled into the valley, the Whitmans began a new tradition. Every year, on the anniversary of Emma's return, they would go to the edge of the woods where she had been found. There, they planted wildflowers, lavender, daisies, and tiny blue forget-me-nots. Emma chose the spots. She said they marked places where dreams had slept. The town joined in, eventually building a small community garden in her name, Emma's Meadow. A plaque stood at its center, reading, "In memory of the years lost, and in honor of the courage that brought her home." Emma visited often, always bringing her sketchbook. She no longer folded the page with the cabin. Now it stood open, painted in warm colors, smoke curling from the chimney, and three figures sitting beneath the stars: a girl, a woman, and a man with a beard, holding a rabbit in his arms. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the meadow glowed gold, Sarah looked over at her daughter and whispered, "Do you remember what you used to say when you were little?" Emma shook her head, smiling. "You'd say, 'If I ever get lost, Mommy will find me.' She always does." Emma reached out and took her mother's hand. "Well," she said softly, "I guess you did." And just like that, the past folded into the present, not forgotten, but gently placed where it belonged, in the hearts of those who had waited, those who had hoped, and most of all, in the quiet strength of a girl who had found her way home. Thank you for following this emotional journey from beginning to end. If you'd like more stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for future content that moves, inspires, and uplifts.